Hungarian Folk Tales. Green Peter. Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, there stood a large farm. A family lived on that farm with a husband, a wife, a son, and a daughter. When his wife died, the husband married again so that there should be someone to bring up the children. But the new wife did not like the children, and she put poison in their food. When the children sat down to eat their supper, a white dove flew down and said, "Children, don't eat the soup because it's poisoned. Run away from home and never look back." The boy and his young sister walked and walked until they heard someone calling, "Green Peter, Green Peter, come here." It was a poor little fish cast ashore by the sea. "Pick me up, Green Peter, throw me back into the water, do good and you will prosper." So the boy happily helped the little fish. They walked and walked until they heard someone calling, "Green Peter, Green Peter, come here." This time it was a little bird that had lost its flock. The bird begged the boy, "Green Peter, please put me on the branch so that I can fly on with my bird brothers." Green Peter put it up on the branch, and the little bird said to him, "Thank you, do good, and you will prosper." They walked and walked until they heard someone calling, "Green Peter, come here." A poor shriveled rosebush was calling. It begged the boy to water its roots. "Well, Green Peter," the rosebush said, "do good and you will prosper." Green Peter and his sister walked until they came to the town. When he reached the gate, the people called out to him, "Come in, Green Peter, come in, because there are already 99 heads on stakes and yours will be the 100th one." Even though Green Peter was afraid, he went in all the same. And he was told that the princess would marry the first man who could hide himself so well that she would never find him. So Green Peter went in and was ordered to hide himself 3 mornings running, because otherwise he would be beheaded. But if the princess failed to find him, she and half the kingdom would be his. Poor Peter wept and wept and said to himself, "I've just managed to get away from my evil stepmother, and look what trouble I'm in again. Where could I possibly hide?" Suddenly the little fish appeared. "Why are you crying, Green Peter?" "Because the king said that unless I can hide from his daughter, he will have me beheaded." The fish opened its mouth and said, "Hide in here, Green Peter." So Green Peter slipped into the fish's mouth, and it swam to the bottom of the deep sea, where it hid itself in the sand. The young princess stepped out into the corridor. She rubbed her eyes and said, "Come out, Green Peter, from the mouth of the fish, from the sand at the bottom of the sea." So Green Peter came out, he crawled sadly out of the mouth of the fish and went to the royal palace. The next morning he tried again. "Where, oh where shall I hide?" Suddenly the little bird flew down and said to him, "Why are you crying, Green Peter?" "Why indeed, if I don't manage to hide from the princess, I'll be beheaded." The little bird spread its wings and said, "Come on, hide beneath my wings." And it flew up behind the back of the sun. When the princess came out to the corridor, she rubbed her eyes and caught sight of him at once. "Green Peter, come out from behind the back of the sun, from beneath the bird's wings." The bird flew down to the ground and let Green Peter slip out from under its wings. Green Peter went sadly back, and next morning he again set out. But by now he was crying more than ever before. "Oh, oh, oh, what will become of me?" The rosebush came up to him and said, "Don't worry, I'm going to hide you." They went before the royal palace and stopped right in front of the corridor. The rosebush sat down and said, "Hide among my leaves and thorns," and it opened up so that it became more radiant than the sun itself. The princess came out. She rubbed her eyes, but she couldn't see Green Peter anywhere. "Rub your eyes again, my girl," said the king. "Or would you prefer to marry?" Again the princess rubbed her eyes. She looked and looked, but to no avail. She eventually grew tired of looking for the lad and called out to him, "Come out, Green Peter, come out from wherever you are. I can't see you anywhere." And so Green Peter came out at last. The young couple married right away. He got half the kingdom too, and the wedding feast lasted for 3 long days. I was there myself, and I had a fine time. I was even given a nice big bone to chew. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Starry-Eyed Shepherd. Once upon a time, there lived a poor man. He had only one son and a wife. One day his son said, "Father, I'm going to leave home and seek my fortune. Son, be sure to take the path where there's no mud." Then his parents gave the boy a bundle of food and bid him farewell. The boy walked and walked. He walked his way across 7 lands. He did not stop until he arrived at a lush green meadow, where he saw a flock of sheep grazing unattended. "Those poor sheep have been left all alone. I shall watch over them until their shepherd returns." The time passed, but no shepherd appeared. The boy stayed with the sheep until he ran out of food. He thought he would take the sheep down to the local town, where he would sell a few of them to buy some food for himself. The boy walked down into the town and sold a handful of lambs to the local butcher. He then used the money to purchase all that he needed and settled down with his sheep at the edge of the town. A king also lived in this town, and he was a very cruel king indeed. He was so very cruel that he had people executed for not saying "bless you" whenever he happened to sneeze. One Sunday morning, the king sneezed unusually loudly, and so all of his soldiers rode all over the country to order the common people to say, "Bless you, your highness, your very good health." The young shepherd was still out in the meadow watching over his flock when the soldiers rode up to him and ordered him to bless the king, but he refused to obey until the king granted him the hand of his beautiful daughter. So the soldiers carted the shepherd boy off to the palace and presented him to the king. The king's beautiful daughter was also there when they arrived, and she liked the young shepherd, but said nothing of it to anyone. Then the king addressed the shepherd, saying, "Will you not bless me, your king, and wish me good health?" "I will not, your highness, even if you have me killed, though I happily would if you let me marry your beautiful daughter." "A lowly shepherd boy like you will never marry my beautiful daughter." Then he ordered his soldiers to throw the shepherd boy to the hungry wild pigs. There the shepherd boy took out his flute and played a merry tune to the fat pigs. And the pigs liked the music so much that they began to dance. The shepherd made them dance until the pigs began to sweat and were all so tired that they fell fast asleep. Then the starry-eyed shepherd felt tired too and laid his head down for the night. In the morning, the marshal went to see if the boy was still alive, and when he saw that he was, he took him before the king again. "Now, young shepherd, wish that God should bless me and give me good health." "I will not, your majesty, not until you grant me your daughter's hand, not even if you throw me into the pit." "Guards, throw him into the pit with the scythe blades." "Oh, that's no joke. If I'm cast down into the pit," the shepherd thought, "the blades will cut me to shreds." The soldiers asked the shepherd again, "Well, will you now ask that God bless the king and wish him good health?" "Wait 1 minute, my good men. Leave me alone for a moment while I think." So the soldiers left the starry-eyed shepherd alone. The young shepherd stuck his crook into the ground, took off his coat, and then put his hat on top of the crook. He shouted to the soldiers, "Now you can come in and do with me what you will, for I shall never wish that God bless the king and give him good health." Then he swiftly hid himself in a dark corner. The soldiers were sure that the crook, the coat, and the hat were the shepherd boy, so they threw them into the pit. The candle down in the pit went out, and so they thought that the poor shepherd had landed on it and died. The very next morning, the marshal went out to check the pit. He heard a pretty tune playing on a flute inside. What on earth can this mean? It's impossible that the shepherd is playing his flute. So he opened the door of the house and saw the shepherd there merrily blowing his flute. He locked the door on the shepherd and ran back to the king. "Your Royal Highness, the starry-eyed shepherd is still alive." "Bring him before me at once," the king demanded. The shepherd was again presented, and the king again told him, "Ask that God bless me and wish me good health." "I will never do such a thing until I can marry your daughter, even if you have me thrown to the owls." "Take him to the tower. He will soon beg God to bless me and wish me good health when the hungry owls peck out his starry eyes." So they took the shepherd boy to a chamber in the tower. But as soon as the door was closed, he took out his flute and began to play, and a miraculous thing happened. All the animals in the tower began to dance to his merry tune. The animals screeched and shrieked, and the young shepherd made them dance until they were all tired out. Then they all pulled themselves away and fell fast asleep. Then the shepherd joined them and slept until morning. The next morning, the marshal went up to the tower. He opened the door to see the boy sitting and laughing to his heart's content. The king's marshal ran quickly back to his master. "Your Highness, the shepherd is laughing as happily as if he owned the whole land." "What a tough boy he is. He cannot be killed. Bring him here at once." "It is true that you cannot be killed. Now sit in the golden carriage." So the shepherd boy sat in the golden carriage, and they drove deep into the silver forest. Then the king asked, "Tell me, shepherd, if I gave you this splendid silver forest, would you ask that God bless me and wish me good health?" "No, your Royal Highness, I would not. It's not the silver forest that I long for, but your daughter." Then they drove further still until they came to a golden pond where all the fish and water creatures were made of the purest gold. Then the king asked once more, "If I gave you this pond, would you ask that God bless me and wish me good health?" "No, never, your Royal Highness." "Then let's drive on." They soon arrived at a wonderful white wall made of marble, and within the limits of the wall stood a palace studded with sparkling diamonds. It truly was a beautiful sight. "Now, shepherd, ask that God bless me and wish me very good health." "I will not, your Royal Highness, until I can marry your daughter." "What a terrible fellow you are!" And as nothing else could be done, the king let it be known that his daughter would marry the starry-eyed shepherd, and the wedding would be in 2 days' time. He warmly welcomed all his subjects to the feast and offered a banquet of good food and fine wine, and all the men in the kingdom attended, along with their wives, who all ate and drank to their heart's content. The tables were piled high with delicious dishes, including hot horseradish that made the old king sneeze. Then the shepherd began to say, "May God bless you, sire, and give you good health. May God bless you, sire, and give you good health. May God bless you, sire, and give you good health." And he said it over and over until the king interrupted. "Stop telling me that, son-in-law. If you stop saying it, I will grant you all I have, my country and my kingdom too." Then the king gave all he possessed to the starry-eyed shepherd, whose poor parents moved to the palace, and they all lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. Pinko. Once upon a time, there lived an old woodcutter who was poorer than a mouse. One day, the woodcutter said to his wife, "Wife of mine, please bake me 2 corn cakes that I can take them out to work with me so that I won't have to come home to eat." So the woodcutter's wife baked the cakes, put them in the woodcutter's bag, and he set off to work in the forest. Down in the forest lived old Paluto, and old Paluto had a young son called Pinko. Pinko listened keenly to the sound of the woodcutter's axe and watched the old woodcutter from the shadows. Then the crafty boy took the woodcutter's bag down and gobbled up both the corn cakes. But old Paluto got wind of what his son had done. "Where are you, Pinko?" old Paluto called out to his son. "Here I am, father." "Come quickly, where have you been?" "I have just gobbled up the old woodcutter's corn cakes." "As you felt no pity for the poor woodcutter, you will now have to serve for 3 long years in return. Do you understand?" This news saddened Pinko, but he agreed to do his father's bidding. So he turned on his heels and went back to the woodcutter. When he arrived, he said, "Woodcutter, I am the one who ate your corn cakes. So be happy, my child, and don't sound so sad. But it doesn't work like that because my father has punished me and told me that I should work as your servant for 3 long years. There is no need, my child, because I could never pay you, but I can earn my own living." And wonder of wonders, Pinko plucked the trees from the ground and knocked them together to make neat logs to be stacked. By the time night came, he had cleared the whole forest. "Can we go home now?" "Yes, but first I want to gather some sticks for the fire." Pinko set hard to work and gathered up so much firewood that even 20 oxen could not have carted it home. Then he lifted the poor woodcutter up and placed him on top of the pile. The very next day, the poor woodcutter went to the rich farmer to tell him that he had felled, cut and stacked all the wood for winter. The farmer was reluctant to believe him, and so he sent servants to see for themselves. They returned in the evening and informed him that the forest had been cleared and neatly stacked for winter. So the rich farmer was forced to pay the poor woodcutter. Then the woodcutter made his way home, where he and Pinko agreed that they should seek work with the Baron the very next day. "You came at the very best time," the Baron told them, "because the field I have to plough would take 100 men, a year and a day to complete." So the old man went to the market with Pinko, where they purchased 2 young calves and then went back to the field to plough it. There were very many men ploughing with a dozen oxen. So Pinko strode out to the middle of the field, and by noon he had already ploughed more than all the other men put together. The other workers were so impressed by Pinko's calves that they asked for what price he would gladly sell them. But Pinko was proud of the calves and asked for a sack of gold along with the 12 oxen. They bargained and bargained until the Baron agreed to pay Pinko's asking price. The sack of gold was measured out for him, he was given the 12 oxen, and then he was sent on his way. The Baron's men began to plough the land with the 2 calves, but however they pulled and pushed the tiny beasts, they would not work. They quickly reported the bad news to the Baron, who ordered them to search for Pinko and bring him back at once. The men soon caught Pinko. Then Pinko took the handle of the plough in one hand, cracked his whip with the other, and the calves began to plough as never before. This is how you should do it, he told them, and he went home. Back at home, he and the woodcutter discussed where Pinko should next seek work, and they agreed that he should visit the king the very next day. You came at the very best time, the king told them, because the corn I have to thresh would take 100 men a year and a day to complete. They went to the barn that was piled to the rafters with corn to be threshed. But Pinko grabbed one stack and threshed it in no time at all. Then he took all the rest of the wheat, oats, millet and barley and threshed it all before the day was done. Then Pinko went to the king to tell him the corn was threshed. "Oh, but you shouldn't have done it like that." "Why, what did I do wrong? The wheat, the barley, the oats and the millet should be separate." "That's no matter. I shall sort them apart." And no sooner had he spoken than, wonder of wonders, the grain all stood in neat piles. "What payment do you ask for your hard work, son?" "Only 1 sack of wheat," Pinko said. "Very well, you may come and collect it whenever you wish." Pinko returned home, and he and the woodcutter gathered all the canvas they could find and spent a week sewing the sack. Now let's go and collect our payment. The next day they reported to the king, who ordered his bailiff to fill Pinko's sack with wheat in payment for his work. Then they went to the barn and began to fill the sack and shovel all the grain in that Pinko had threshed. But that was only enough to fill one small corner of the sack. So the farm bailiff went back to the king and told him the size of the sack that Pinko had sewn. The king said, "I have agreed, and so I shall pay, but he will never be able to take the big sack away with him." So the men continued to fill the sack with last year's grain and the grain from the year before, and the sack still was not full when they had used up wheat from the last 10 years. "What kind of king is this man who cannot pay me for an honest day's work?" Pinko complained to the bailiff. Then Pinko took the enormous sack and swung it over his shoulder, and he and the poor woodcutter left for home. They walked away without even saying goodbye, and when they got home, there was much celebration. Now they had grain, wood, oxen and gold, and could at last live a happy life. As the months turned to years, Pinko said to the woodcutter, "I have been with you now for 3 long years, so I will leave you in the morning." The woodcutter pleaded and appealed for him to stay, but Pinko left for home. And when Pinko got home, there was much celebration, and they all lived happily ever after.